Hey everyone, welcome to the Cip Stack Video Podcast. This week, as discussed, we're doing something slightly different, and I want to welcome you to the Writer Review Series, where we're going to review some of our published articles from the last couple of weeks to really help you dial in your writing skills, give you some inspiration, and help you work on your writing tradecraft. Here's today's edition. Bust the block. How to deal with writer's block when it impedes your progress. This article, as an aside, is a supplement to the previously published Horizontal Thinking, generating ideas that go nowhere to make room for the better ideas. Both deal with strategies for tackling writer's block, and I recommend reading them together to develop a new toolbox. Everyone at some point or another in their writing career runs into writer's block. It's a dreaded feeling, like creeping doom, the sudden realization that there is nowhere to run, or write, rather. Or maybe you have the itch to write something new, and the creativity faucet is stopped up. You stare at manuscript pages and yet nothing seems to materialize. Let's discuss some ideas for dealing with writer's block and how to generate new ideas. Some of them you may be familiar with, while hopefully others offer a new approach. The first exercise I want to offer has less to do with creating more ideas and more to do with making space for them. Our brains get pretty cluttered with all the newfangled distractions we now jam into them. Do you remember in the olden times, in the long ago, when you had to defragment your computer and then it would run faster? What if I told you there was a way that you could do that with your brain? Quick disclaimer, I am not a doctor. None of what follows should be considered medical advice or treatment for psychological ailments. This is for the purposes of idea generation. Now, the human mind is naturally pretty ordered and analytical. Yes, even us creative types have a more organized brain than we realize. One of the best ways to restore order to your brain is by listening to classical music. Now, I know this seems a little cheesy and maybe a little boring. It took me a little while to really give this a chance and even longer to make a habit of it. So I'm going to start you off easy. Here's what I want you to try. For 7 days, spend 20 minutes distraction-free listening to classical music. It can be whomever you like, just not a movie score. I recommend Bach, Massenet, or Schubert. Turn off your phone, or at least put it out of reach, shut off the TV and computer, and just pay attention to the sound of the music. Listen with the same intention as though you were reading. Dozens of university studies show that the mathematical nature of classical music helps your brain reorder itself and can improve your attention span, which is something we desperately need in today's society since our attention span has fallen to like 8 seconds. This natural defragmentation of your brain does not just impact your analytical skills, but also your creativity and higher order thinking. It clears pathways for you to start thinking differently. Additionally, this exercise will have a calming effect and help reduce some anxiety, which is just another good benefit. Let's jump into some exercises specifically designed to spur your creativity. Now, the first one I call the write about it method, and it's pretty simple. You're going to pick an object and write about it. Okay, on to the next topic. All right, so it isn't quite that simple, but it almost is. The idea behind the write about it method is to essentially force yourself out of your comfort zone by writing about a mundane, inanimate, or quirky object. Your comfort zone in this case is functionally your work in progress. Whatever you're working on that you've gotten stuck in, part of the reason you may be stuck is because of over-familiarity. This can breed creative atrophy. By stepping outside that work, way outside, you can jumpstart a stalled creative engine. Here's what I want you to do. Go for a walk or head out on an errand you've been neglecting. Do something that puts you intentionally out in the world and observing. Take notes about what you see. These don't have to be complicated notes, just quick words. Banana, bench, birds. Why am I stuck on bees? Anyway, you get it. List the things you see. When you return to your writer station, look at the list and pick something on it that, for whatever reason, stands out just a little bit more than the others. Now start writing a story about it. But make it as strange and fantastical as you possibly can. Really weird it up. And if you can, try and do this in the genre you're already writing. Why? Well, the fact is, the answer to your writer's block is probably more obvious than you realize. But because you're stuck thinking about your work in a very specific way, you're missing it. By writing a romantic fairy tale about a banana or an epic sci-fi space opera about a park bench, your brain will re-engage with your genre in newly creative ways. This works for any genre, by the way, not just fantasy. Try and write a humorous story about a mossy marble pillar, or a horror story about an embroidered throw pillow. Once your brain is spooled up, you'll find that the ideas begin to flow easier for your actual work in progress. And hey, you still end up with a goofy short story that might be usable somewhere else. And that's part of the sneaky secret to this. One of the best ways to beat writer's block is to write. Now, sometimes the best thing you can do when you're stuck is to ask yourself, or is to ask someone else rather, for help. After all, if the answer is not presenting itself, then maybe what you need is external input. That seems pretty intuitive, right? When it comes to writing, this sometimes works. But if you're asking someone else for advice on the direction of your work in progress, you're more than likely going to end up with a story flow biased towards their preferences rather than your unique natural style. This is not necessarily a bad thing, as it can force you to experiment, but it may be so unnatural it really interrupts your manuscript. So when I say ask someone else what you should write about, I mean literally have them give you a topic and you write about it, unrelated to your current work. This may feel a little like shifting gears without using the clutch at first, but it can really kick your creativity into high gear. Here's a few examples. This is a personal one I love to share. A few years ago, I was fortunate enough to participate in Inkfort Press Writers Derby, which is actually how I met the author Skylar Dates. If you're unfamiliar with the contest, writers are assigned a book cover, title, and pen name, and have 3 months to produce a work under those conditions. When I wrote for the Derby, I ended up writing something so far outside my normal comfort zone that I was afraid I would botch the contest completely. I ended up loving what I came up with, and it kickstarted a creativity period wherein I returned to several works I was stuck on and got them moving again. By being told what to write and not choosing to write it, it took the creative paralysis out of the equation. I wasn't following my normal rules because the story I was writing was so different than what I usually create, and it was super liberating. Similar results happened to REM when they recorded Out of Time. They all played different instruments and took on different roles in the band, which spurred their creativity. Since they could no longer think in the same ways they had previously, they generated new ideas. Being told you have to do this can feel limiting, but it actually represents an interesting opportunity to free your mind up from the decision-making process. When your brain doesn't decide what it has to do, it has more space to consider how it is going to do it. And writer's block is usually a suffering of the how. So next time you don't know what to write about, ask someone to give you an assignment. Now, hopefully this topic has been helpful in your writer's journey. Writer's block can be a pretty big pain, especially when you can feel creativity just crackling on your fingertips, but never quite sparking. There are just a few more that I want to touch on in terms of promoting whole mind and body health, because your brain works best when your body is too. First, you might be surprised at how much good exercise does for your brain. There are a lot of studies that show a link between cognitive and neural function and an active body. Now, even if you're not athletically inclined, this does not have to be a huge lift. Get in a lift. Anyway, walking for 30 minutes a day, doing a light jog or some resistance training a few times a week stimulates your brain as much as it does your heart. After just a few days of adding some activity in your schedule, you'll be amazed at the new problem solving and creative thinking you find your brain engaging in. Once again, just a side note here, I am not a doctor. I cannot recommend a physical routine for you. Please consult with a physician before beginning any kind of new physical activity. Second, read. In a discussion with another writer, J.J. Flowers, earlier this week, the consensus was one of the best ways to snap writer's block is to simply take in new ideas. The whole premise of our main story 2 weeks ago was why writers should read. It feeds your brain. It infuses new ideas. It pummels your creativity with a flood of alternative flows, methods, and perspectives. So if you find that you are well and truly stuck on something and the work in progress is not, progressing, then read. Read 10 pages. Hell, read 100. The more you read and expose yourself to new ideas, the more likely it is you'll break through your own plateaus. All right. You're armed with a half dozen new methods of cracking the dreaded block and making forward progress in your work. So what are you still doing sitting here? Get writing. Thanks for joining us on today's edition of the Writer Review Series. We can't wait to see you again tomorrow, where we'll have more tips, new tricks, and more inspiration to help you along on your writer's journey. We'll see you then.